All right, and Trampled Underfoot Podcast is live.
We are live.
So, I mean, for those of you that get the links over there, you have a preview of us. This is what we usually do: um, hang out and discuss current event topics, history, nostalgia. What else do we do?
Oh, pop culture, you name it. We're all over the place.
Music.
Yeah, we're everywhere. We're all over the map.
Um, so earlier I was looking at the life of Vincent van Gogh, and I did mention to you that I wanted to mention a little bit about it.
Right.
Um, so Vincent van Gogh, I was watching a documentary, and he's like one of the greats, right? The painters.
Sure.
And so his life was full of tragedy and sort of I guess melancholy. He he contracted a couple of venereal diseases. He ate lead paints. At the time, they did not know that paints containing lead or lead in itself was an issue. He was distraught. He only lived to about 37, 38 years old. And so his mom, she had a stillborn that was named Vincent, and they named him when he was born afterwards the same. And his mom, according to the documentary, never warmed up to him, which I find, and that affected him deeply. And you could see it in his letters and writings to his brother that hung with him till the end of his life. But the whole idea of tragedy, melancholy, depression, that artists, that we could have, how many examples do we have of that?
Oh boy. I don't know that anybody could count. That seems to be a running theme with artists. I don't remember who it was who said that there is no such thing as a normal artist. I mean, it's real easy for me to say, but artists tend to, I don't know, they have the reputation of being eccentric and what have you, but I don't even know if that covers it. So
eccentric is one of them. And isn't there sort of, I have my opinions on it, but they also have, so people that I mean, look at, let's come to current day. Look at Bobby Duke. He's kind of eccentric with his, his way of conversing to the camera and his approach to there's quirkiness in there. There's eccentric in there. And that's just one example just to bring up right now. But throughout Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
What a disturbing. I've read a few of his books, or of the Doors and his books, and the guy was distraught and ended it pretty early because of his crazy behavior.
His excesses, yeah. And that's, well, the 27 Club. I mean, it gets a lot of them. It got Morrison, it got Hendrix, it got Joplin, it got Keith Moon.
And then there's in the 90s, Kurt Cobain.
Kurt Cobain, yeah. Yeah, he was 27 also, that's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of, so people that are on the creative side, I don't know why that is. There seems to be, in my opinion, like some sort of intangible life is not, and I'm not trying to put but I kind of relate to that. There's an unstableness, not insanity, as in unable to, well, at least in my case, unable to comprehend and see, reality, but there's a drifting out of the main path into areas that are uncharted, a little bit more covered with vines, and just off the beaten path, and those places are disturbing when you keep in line with, you know, the Winnie the Pooh. Well, even Winnie the Pooh went off the beaten
Yeah, I mean,
path.
and look at A. Milne. I mean, you know, yes, he wrote the story for his son, but you know, you don't come up with something like that after a cup of coffee. There's got to be something behind it. And I'm doing this, not meaning that they're crazy. There's got to be something. I can do it in front of my face. There's got to be something behind that that drives that quote unquote adventure forward. You know, someone who is good with words, like Mark Twain or Will Rogers, there has to be some sort of, I hesitate to say mania, but it's almost like a mania behind them that drives them towards that end. I mean, just to be able to come up with the premise of the story, then flesh it out.
Yeah.
Some people are natural born storytellers through their medium, whether it be a song lyric or a painting or a sculpture or something like that, because make no mistakes, paintings and sculpture do convey a story. But the creative process behind that is something that's kind of escaped me. And I got to the point eventually to where it's like, don't try to analyze it, just enjoy it. You know, that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because you can. So, you know, another thing about it, we see these life stories. So the Van Gogh thing, because I just got done watching that documentary, you see him, the birth. He has his mom that rejected him actually taught him how to draw. That was a thing in like the Dutch, you know, and or at least in their family. And so him and his brother would draw, but he really took to it, but she wasn't impressed. You know, overall, she rejected him. She wasn't too close because of that initial tragedy. But as you start going through his life, he carries those early sort of rejection and that thing, and he lives a melancholy. And you can see in his painting, he became a minister. The places that he ministered, the churches and whatnot, would kick him out because he was also combative and had a certain stern nature. And then you see this whole, he's trying, you see, and I kind of, when I was watching that, I kind of relate, not that I can, but like the melancholy of life, I kind of relate to that myself. I see light at the end of the tunnel, but it's sort of like, how could I put this? He was kind of living the blues, like for our current sort of time. And all these blues players going into music, they document that. So you see this evolution through a person's life in the music artist, you know, painter, all these people, that it's kind of like they're perched on a sort of balanced wire of oops and okay, I'm okay, oops and I'm okay. I guess that's life in the end. But they create these representations of like fantastic that everybody else looks and is like, wow. And it's like we keep cycling through the same processes every generation. It's the same sort of cycle, I think.
Well, yeah, it is. And about the only, I don't know about the only change. Let me retract that. The thing that changes most about it is the technology in which they use to express it. I mean, when you go back to the old masters, like you're talking about Van Gogh, he expressed in the medium that he had available to him at the time. With the digital age here, I mean, art is just going off the charts anymore. And so the technological revolutions that we're having right now open up expression to a lot of people who, you know, if you don't have the talent, you can't draw. That doesn't mean that you can't do something on computer. You can't do something digitally.
Yeah.
You know? So it's opened it up to more and more and more and more people. Well, and we're seeing the evidence of that just on social media, you know, YouTube, what have you. It's opened up. I mean, there's a vast audience out there, and anybody can create now.
Yeah. So just to add to that, as an example in a micro, it's like a micro example of like so many examples of what you're saying. There's a guy in Mexico. I don't know if it's like, what's that place that's very famous for like people to vacation in Mexico? I know there's a few, but there's one that's like the beach sort of like place.
Acapulco, Cancun.
One of those two. He's in one of those two places. And the guy, his thing is, because back in the 80s and I guess prior to that, but there was a big explosion of graffiti and whatnot with spray cans. Well, this guy from Mexico, he films, posts it on YouTube, and what he does is he spray paint art on poster boards, and the guy has got like 300,000+ followers, if not more, with millions upon millions and millions of views of him spray paint art, which is fantastic, using stencils and also by hand. And he actually has a little slogan thing that he says. He goes, "Fire." He says fire, but he says it with his accent. He goes, "Fire." And then he'll take a lighter and he'll hit the spray, the aerosol, so it can cover the canvas and sort of dry up the paint so you can go to the next layer. But the amount of diverse now and the ability to express it, like what you were saying, I just thought that was a good example I just thought of.
Oh yeah, I mean, developing the technique, training the eye. I mean, I don't know if that gentleman has studied art at all, but it's not as arduous a process. I mean, it can be. I know people, my son-in-law being one of them, who's been studying a good portion of his life and training and training and training. But there are other people who seem to just be born with this natural eye for it and a natural ability. I mean, anything from color to shape to perspective. And while they may not think they're studying or they're training or they're practicing for it, every time they pick up a pencil or a piece of chalk or a marker or whatever their medium of choice is, they are practicing and they are refining their craft. And we see evidence of it all around us. And I think it's great. The explosion is there. But, you were talking about some of the things behind Van Gogh and his life and the way he lived. You have that mentality and that psychology behind the painting and the art, but you also have the technical abilities. I'm not explaining this right. What I'm in music, you have somebody like Joe Satriani or Steve Vai or Eric Johnson, who is technically at the top. I mean, these guys never miss a note. They will play 1,000 notes, within about a 2-minute solo. Then you have guys like David Gilmour, who will take just a handful of notes and fill up a 3-minute solo.
Let me say something about that.
Okay.
If I can do it. So to me, just interjecting, those people that so they fill up the passage of music with a lot of notes in a technical way.
Right.
And you're about to say the opposite of another sort of way, right?
Well, no, I was going to relate it to art in like the works of Van Gogh versus MC Escher.
Okay.
MC Escher was very mathematical, very technically correct, technically perfect. Where you have somebody like Monet or Van Gogh or Rembrandt, choose any of them. They were more expressive in their art. It did not have to be technically perfect. But if you look at MC Escher's art, it was technically perfect. You look at something like Waterfall, where he was doing his perspective prints.
There's feeling,
right,
and then there's the technical precision.
Right.
Okay, yeah. And so the blues, as an example with the music thing that you said, like with Satriani and Steve Vai and all that, they don't occupy in the blues category. In fact, forget the master blues, like the Eric Claptons and the BB Kings. Degrade it down complication wise to a guy sitting in Mississippi in front porch, rattling, this guitar. The feeling is the prime, and there's, to me, that resonates with me. The technical stuff does, because obviously, but there's something that touches inside the soul concerning music and art with the feeling that you don't have to have that precision, like you're saying, necessarily.
Exactly. I mean, you do have to be technically correct in that if you're going to play a G chord, you have to play a G chord. You can't, half step it. But taking that technical ability up to the level of a Satriani or Steve Vai or something like that is another realm altogether, and it is exactly as you were saying, it's the feeling, it's the heart, it's the soul. I mean, a wise man once said, the blues ain't nothing but a good man feeling bad. And if you listen to the lyric and you listen to the emotion that's in the music of somebody like, oh, good grief, Muddy Waters or Robert Johnson, it's all there. The technical ability is there as well. But it's not about technical ability. It's about emotion. It's there to get an emotional response out of you.
Yeah.
It's not there to freak you out. It's not there to blow your mind. It's not there to make you go, holy cow, look at this guy. Look at what he can do. It's there to make you feel something.
A big thing, and I don't know if the obvious thing to say, and there might be other ways of looking at it, but I think strongly that this is the correct thing. American music, because of the folk and the traditional that came up through the centuries, the few centuries that this country's been around, it created the blues and the jazz and all that. And but these were people that didn't have much. They saw an instrument, they picked it up, they learned how to play it, sometimes the wrong way, and the wrong way created the popular music that right now at this point, it's not the necessarily the popular music, but the blues and the rock and roll. These were people that weren't trained classically most of the time. There were people that were, but back in the old world, they used to have the teachers with the rulers. They still brought that here, but that was the proper, and you'd hit the kid with the what do you call it? The stick.
With the ruler, yeah.
And that's the old world. Like I also was looking at Beethoven, and his dad would beat living daylights out of him if he got something wrong. He'd force him to play. It was like sort of a disciplinarian view of music. And what happened in America, and there might be great examples, because frankly, Beethoven, what was Amadeus? Mozart, they broke into their own thing, but they had those beginnings of like tap, tap on the finger, do it again, tap, tap, that discipline, but they did break out. But in America, there was this sort of like, I hate to say it, but like Wild West, and people started picking up guitars like crazy, and instruments like crazy, and just doing it. And it's a paradigm shift of how to do music, I think.
Yeah, it's. I hesitate to say that it carried the rebellion forward, but I don't know. To me, that's just evidence of what I consider to be the separate American culture. A lot of people around the world think that America's too young to have a culture. And in some ways, they may be correct. In other ways, I think they're absolutely 100% wrong. I mean, America is strange. It is special. I mean, you have everyone from, oh my gosh, if you want to get into blues, it was based on, well, African rhythms and African roots, but then adapted to the lyrics they made up themselves, and then adapted to the music that they created themselves, just with homemade instruments, uh, you know, diddly bows and 3 and 4 string guitars, and simple melodies that could be carried over and over, that call and return, and it became a part of the distinct American culture. And the same holds true with country and western, or bluegrass. If you listen to bluegrass and then get into some seriously traditional Celtic music, be it Irish or Scottish, you will see a tremendous number of similarities there, because the people from the Appalachian Mountains were primarily of Scottish, Irish, or Scots-Irish descent. And they carried those tunes, the lyrics, and some cases the music with them, but it was adapted to the instruments they built and the instruments they made. And it became another part of the American culture. You have instruments like the mountain dulcimer that is 100% pure American. There's no other example of it like it anywhere in the world. It was developed to play that Appalachian bluegrass music. And it just keeps going on and on and on. We got into jazz, then we got into rock and roll. And it all was the progression of being different, of not accepting that slap on the knuckles by the ruler and saying, no, I'm going to push away the piano bench. My name is Jerry Lee Lewis, or my name is Little Richard. Watch this. It was the shoving away of the convention, exploring and being willing to push the technology of the time and push not only their creative ability, but the minds of the listeners themselves. I mean, can you think of, I can't spot it, but who was the first person to turn up the gain on an electric guitar to get that distortion on purpose?
That had to be a random kid in either England or here in America, or it could be anywhere. But yeah,
Yeah.
you know what? Actually, you know what? I'm gonna take a risk, and then we'll see. But I'm gonna take a risk. You're probably typing it up already, but I think it was the Kinks.
You know,
The Kinks guitarist. I remember the story vaguely, but I'll just put it out there. The Kinks guitarist. Remember the song? I think it was "You Really Got Me."
okay.
It was either the Kinks or some other person, obviously, but publicly known, where either their speaker was torn, or they purposely cut the speaker, or they got angry and they punctured the speaker. Maybe the Who. Let me see if I could find that. But I recall the Kinks for some reason. They did have heavy guitars for the time.
Yeah.
In that 1960s, You Really Got Me. I don't know if you found it yet or not.
Well, no, I'm not looking that up. What I'm looking for was a song by Booker T and the MGs called Green Onions. Most folks don't remember that name, Green Onions, but if they heard the tune, they would know it. It was used heavily in American Graffiti in the drag racing scene. But to me, I think that's the first time I've heard that real kind of heavy guitar with that just a little bit of gain to it. And we're talking, that was 1962. So I don't know if that it really qualifies or not. But
So
go ahead.
well, no. So just to that, it goes a little bit earlier than that, and probably earlier, but early uses of amplified distortion. But the incident I was talking about, so they actually put up Chuck Berry and Maybelline as one. It features a warm if you hear the beginning of that it goes da 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 bunch bunch and bunch. It has an early sort of overdriven sound. I haven't gotten into the specifics of it, but Chuck Berry is there, and in the blues they do name a few Elmer James and Buddy Guy and stuff.
Buddy Guy, yeah. Well,
yeah.
But it goes back that far, and that's what I'm getting at, the pushing the development of that, because the whole idea behind the amplifier for the guitar was just so the ding dong thing could be heard, you know, so it could be heard over the rest of the band, because guitars just basically, yeah, they were for country western, they were for what we would now call folk, and they were for the traveling bands, the Carter family and what have you, but they weren't really featured in any of the jazz. You know, there was no guitarist for Benny Goodman or for Glenn. Oh gosh, I'm just.
Campbell,
based on his last name, not Campbell. Glenn Miller Orchestra. There was no guitarist in that because they couldn't be heard over the brass, you know.
Yeah.
So they went with resonators and the National Steel guitar to try to get more volume out of it. And it was in the 20s and 30s that the amplified electric guitar was really starting to be developed seriously, but it still wasn't a featured instrument. So
nobody would have even guessed at the time that it would be anything of significance at the level that it became, because you had your classical music, you know, where it was featured, and but other than that, and then there did from that spring out eventually the jazz guitars, where the feature of the album was the guitar with the jazz, but that's after technology allowed for that that volume to increase on the guitar.
Yeah,
you know, like Ben, what was this guy's name? There's a lot of jazz guitars with that smooth, you know, where they use the octaves and stuff. I can't think of them now. I have a bunch of their CDs in my iPod.
I am so not into jazz, it's not even funny. I'm so not. I mean, the last jazz performer I listened to with any regularity was Maynard Ferguson, and he's a trumpet. His instrument is the trumpet. So, but that was back in the 70s, and then I experimented with only like 2 albums of his, you know. So
yeah, I like the jazz, and I like that. I don't know if we did this on Hangouts or on the podcast or separately on a Hangout, but you showed me some videos. You said, "Oh, you might dig this," and I think it was some sort of a guy on YouTube that does remakes of songs that we find familiar in different. Tell me about that.
That's Andy Rayfeld.
Okay.
I probably got his last name wrong. He is on YouTube, and what he does is he scours various sources to find isolated tracks. And probably his most famous one is the smooth jazz version of Metallica's Enter Sandman.
Beautiful.
And what he did was he found the isolated track of James Hetfield singing.
Mm-hmm.
Then he did all the music himself. He played drums, he played bass, he played guitar, and it's a smooth jazz music with Hetfield singing Enter Sandman.
So here's the thing. So mainstream, where my mind is set, and I think I could speak for both of us, although that's a bold thing to do, is within the rock and roll sphere, which could divert into blues, and then you have your folk and country and electric folk. You're just all these the things that we typically sort of go to, but there's this sort of offshoot with that sort of jazz or jazz rock, would you call it, or freeform fusion?
Right.
I appreciate and actually get wrapped up in whenever I hear freeform jazz rock sort of fusion. there's something about breaking it down the way they do that I really love. It's a tough one for a lot of people.
Well, you're a musician, so you come at it from a different angle, and you can appreciate a lot more of it than a pedestrian listener like me. You know, I think that's a big part of it. Don't you?
Yeah, because I'm thinking, wow, they redid that, in that way, and they're holding back in order to create space for the other, instruments, and they're playing within that. I think that's an amazing, yeah. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to classify the music I like. I know what I like. I know what I'm not really much for. And I know what's, just kind of hanging around. But with me, it's always been all about guitar. And I can't explain why. But you know what? I'm 57, so I've decided don't try to explain it. Just sit back and enjoy it.
The guitar is an incredibly powerful instrument. I think Segovia, Andres Segovia, he, just the classical guitarist, the master. He said that the guitar is the most, and I'm paraphrasing extreme right now.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the guitar encompasses all instruments. And there's a video out there of him saying this. It says the guitar is an orchestra.
Yeah.
And then he explains it. And then he proceeds to play some notes in different parts of the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, this is a cello. And he'll take the bass higher notes and he'll slide it down. And he'll go up and down. And he says, these are horns. And then he starts plucking the strings and like vibrating them. And he shows horns. And then he says, and this is a violin. And this is and he goes down through the line. This is the guitar encompasses a whole orchestra. He said, obviously he's a proponent of the guitar because that's his life work.
Well, sure.
But still, it was pretty impressive to hear how he looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, very true. So let me ask you this.
Okay.
Our memory banks, how they work, where some things are readily available at hand and some things are there, but in order to comb the library and open up that little file cabinet, sometimes it's a difficult thing. So I'm going to ask you a question and see what pops up into your head.
Okay.
So during the cassette era. During that era, I want you to name me a handful of cassettes that you can still either vividly remember the cover, the little cover, and you owning it, or the cover and the actual, some little story about it. Just name me off a few cassettes that were valuable to you that you look back in fondness of. If you have any of that, I'm sure you do.
Well, the two that I had to buy the most often because they ended up getting stolen from me during parties or, get-togethers or what have you. I bought the soundtrack to the movie FM probably, 7 or 8 times. I bought Molly Hatchet, their Molly Hatchet self-titled album, probably 4 times. Just cassettes would walk away. I still have almost all of my cassettes. They're in a box in the closet because I don't have a cassette player right now.
So you kept them?
Yeah, I've still got them. I have one cassette player to my name, and it's in, I drive a 97 Saturn. That's, how high speed, low drag I am. And it's got a cassette deck in it. So I'll grab a handful of cassettes and take them out and play them, and when I'm tired of those, I'll put them back and grab a few more. But those are the ones that are probably the most memorable because nobody ever really heard of the soundtrack to the movie FM. But when the music started playing, it was a collection of tunes from, Steely Dan, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. There was a Jimmy Buffett song on there, believe it or not. But when the music got playing, people were like, dang, this is a good collection. And next thing I know, it's gone. And I had to go buy it again because somebody decided they needed it more than I did. But oh, and the other one was the same thing. The movie Heavy Metal, the soundtrack to the movie Heavy Metal.
I remember that one.
I've bought it several times too. So things just end up with legs. But the overwhelming majority of my cassettes, I mean, I have a lot of original cassettes, but the overwhelming majority of my cassettes were mixtapes that I made myself. You know, I'd buy a record album for listening to in the house. I didn't play cassettes in the house. That was mainly for the car. And I would record songs from different albums. Like I've got a Stevie Ray Vaughan cassette that's got 4 or 5 cuts off of each one of his studio albums that he made when he was alive. And then I bought the cassette The Sky is Crying because I didn't have a CD player yet.
Which I've mentioned is my favorite blues-drenched album of his from beginning to end. There's a little bit of that jazz blues in that one song, which is called Chili con Carne.
Yep.
That one song, and I love it. I love the whole album from the start to the end. I love that album. Love it. Love it.
Me too. Me too.
A lot. So the first cassette that I can memory bank pop up before I could drive, before I mean, snot still dripping down my nose, you know, was borrowing Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon from my friend. And I don't know what year that was. It could be 82, 83, 84. But that was kind of the first. He played the album, and it was like, I think it starts with Center of the Universe, and, you know, Journey to the Center of the Universe, and it's and it's all that Ozzy Osbourne stuff. After he had left, obviously, Black Sabbath. I didn't know none of that at the time, but I took that home with me. And also, I went and bought on my own during that time, with money that my folks or whoever gave me, and I bought, and you could buy these things. I don't know if nowadays you could, but I went and bought Black Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. And the thing about that album is that I think we've talked about this a lot, but that's my favorite Black Sabbath album by far. It is back chuck full of awesomeness, but the cover scared the living daylights out of me. Because it has Ozzy on a bed, surrounded by flying devil women, topless devil women, and every time I would play the cassette, I'd open it up, and my parents could care less. Like, it wasn't like they were looking at the covers; they could care, like, you know what I'm saying? None of that. But I, as a kid, you're looking at the cover, at the art, and it's red and yellow, like it's a very like two tones. Creepy, and every time I'd slip I felt like we were opening gates into hell.
Well, they were horror metal, man. They were horror metal. I mean, they basically invented the genre, you know. So, I mean, I remember when they were gaining popularity. It wasn't long after Paranoid came out, as a matter of fact. That album went Paranoid, excuse me. That album went crazy. But people all of a sudden started equating with, oh, they're devil worshippers. And it's like, dude, you're not listening to a single thing that they're saying. It's not about Satan or the devil or worshiping it. It's about horror. This is nothing. This is no worse than any of the old Hammer films, you know, Peter Cushing and the rest of them. It was horror for the sake of horror.
Yeah,
you know?
That's what they said.
Pardon?
That's what the band, they said, hey, we just, and in fact, it's part of their timeline. Like they said, let's do horror music.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the genre, that's exactly what it was. And they weren't the only ones did it. I mean, several others picked up on it and went, hey, yeah, let's go crazy with it. So, you know, but they just kind of were another example of pushing the limit. And developing. I mean, there was nothing that sounded like that at the time. So they could basically do what they wanted, and they found their audience, and the audience found them. So
Just amazing.
the rest, as they say, is history. And so a new musical genre is born. But it was getting away from that rigid, structured, classical training. Again, the ruler across the knuckles.
Yeah.
That did it. And once they saw, I mean, you know, when you step back and you look at the music of the late 1800s, early 1900s, up into the 20s, before jazz really took off, I mean, ragtime had its day, and that came into jazz and then swing. That was generations telling the previous generations, no, this is my music. I don't care about yours. And it went even further and progressed and progressed and progressed until here we are now. And we were talking once before about the lack of soul in today's modern music, what we perceive as a lack of soul. I don't know how much of it is a lack of soul as it is. I hesitate to say they've lost their way, but they maybe have lost a direction. There isn't really a direction to travel just yet. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any sense, because you have the whole the swing era, which led into the rock and roll era, then the album era, and the arena rock and everything that encompassed. There was always a direction moving forward, and it was always to be a large, huge experience. It wasn't enough to listen to the song. You had to listen to the album, and then you had to experience the album live at a 2-hour concert or more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's gone away now. We've come back to that, like we were talking about before. We've come back to that era of the single, where it's instant gratification, quick, hit me with it, 3 minutes, done, next song.
Yeah, it's very hard for one to, it's got to be something that's ingrained into me to even have the, I think that because of the computer and instant gratification, you go and you can search out, like I was just saying, I wanted to watch a documentary on Van Gogh, and I just typed it in, and there I have it, and bam, here we go. And it's like we haven't, and that kind of kills, you know, the limitations we had, which we have talked about, actually worked towards our favor in this type of, you know, in this way. But I wouldn't trade this for the lack of you know, having access to everything in the past.
And the people watching Tommy Dorsey or Jimmy Dorsey said the same thing. I wouldn't trade this for anything Scott Joplin did on a piano. And the Scott Joplin's fan said, I wouldn't trade this for anything that came out of 1870.
Dude, I'm sure,
you know,
I'm sure if you took a king, like let's say in a crazy alternate universe from like the 15th, you know, 1500s, and you took him, plucked them out, being king of his lands and everything, and you took his butt out of there and transported him today, sitting in like this chair here in my small house, which is like a cubicle inside. It's probably the latrine, sitting in the servants' quarter in size, and you set the king here, and you said, now listen, man, you have this microphone, this computer, you have a fridge full of, yes, it's cold. You have a shower that you could turn on the water. You have this, and that. Oh, and there's a car outside. It's like a horse, but you just sit in it and you press your toe. You don't even have to do the whole foot. You could put your little toe and press, and it'll go forward. And you know where it'll take you, to this place full of food. And they even have like hot piping soups and clam chowder. If you did that to the guy, I'm sure. But in order to stay here, Mr. King from the 1500s, you have to relinquish all your royal. Here you go. He'll just relinquish it right there if he's sane.
Yeah.
Because this is like, we are kind of living fat on the hog, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We have so many choices in everything. We have so many choices. But sometimes it's too much choice. Sometimes it's too overwhelming. We don't know what we're getting, and then we complain about it. You know.
Yeah.
We have too many choices, so we start basing it on price. And here I go off on this tangent again. You know, give me a couple of seconds. Now that's $10. Now I can get it cheaper. That's $8. That's there's $3. Then we get that and we bring it home and we complain about how crappy it was. And we should have just spent the $10 and got the top of the line. You know, just me. But then again, it's genetic. I'm Scottish, so
I did that. I do that all the time, actually. And I did that with this off topic of what we do, but off of this material that I usually buy for resin and whatnot. I said, you know what, this is great, but no, the stuff that works, man. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive. So I had to go back and purchase to do what I want to do in the timeline and speed that I want to do it.
You get what you pay for, and you're the one that made the choice. So, you know, what are you going to do? But deal with it. Now, how we got on that, I don't know, and I apologize for taking off in that direction.
Well, no, because we got into the whole transporting. I don't even know how we got into but seriously, do you think that king owning, let's say, a huge chunk of all of England, right? But they live in a situation where, you know, you might die the next day. There's infections, disease, there's squalor. And yes, you're in your castle, but they're cold and damp. Dude, and you transport them to a situation like this. And look, man, you're going to have to give up your title, but guess what? All this. Barring that it's a timeline shock to the guy's brain, if he had time to sort of calmly weigh it out, like sanely is the word, I would make that choice. Oh, I'm going to have all this, more free time, less,
Well, sure, there's more free time, but then again, you're also relinquishing power, and you know what they say about power. I mean, it's the heaviest drug that there is. Yeah. I mean, he would live a better life sitting here, but, then he would have to start doing things for himself. And how eager would he be to do that? So, you know how it goes. I mean,
well, I'll ask you this question. Would you, if you had the choice of the king said, hey man, I'm staying, I'll transport your butt back to that situation and you can own all of it, but you're going to be sitting, sure, in your court, in your what do they call it, the chambers, the king's, what do they call that?
Well, in the throne room, in the you're in the palace.
Hey, we have throne rooms too here in
right.
Modern time. But so they'll give you the throne room, with the torches on the sides. You could have beheadings every Saturday if you like. Would you honestly choose to go back and have the control, but you don't have any of the goodbye electricity and all that?
Yeah, nah, forget it. Forget it. Just the lack of dysentery. No cholera. Fresh water. There's a lot to be said for running water. Okay. And I'm not an extravagant guy. I mean, I just set the bar kind of low. Give me clean running water, hot and cold, and I'm a happy guy.
Dude, yeah.
I mean, all the rest of this is just icing on the cake. We live relatively safe, secure lives. Most of us do. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. We live relatively safe, secure lives. Most of us do not have to worry about where our next meal is coming from. And chances are overwhelmingly we're not going to have to defend ourselves to keep it. So
I wouldn't. So I agree with that. And I wouldn't go to the extreme, because I was going to, I for some reason, my mind went to the worst extreme case. Say in America, you might, have a sort of stint of bad luck, and you end up going to like McDonald's, to their little condiment bar, and you take the ketchup packets and a cup of hot water and stir in the ketchup and have yourself some tomato soup. And I was going to say that even that is better than them back there. Maybe not better as the king, but that guy's luck can change in the flick of a switch, and the King's still back there,
But
crafting a frickin' vase.
But even in the most extreme cases, like you're talking right there, we also know that there are places we can go for help.
Right.
Back then you was just on your own.
Yeah.
That was just it. You were on your own.
You live in a country and an area where the fields are full of rabbits, and the King declares rabbits are to be protected.
Even if they're not protected, they are the King's rabbits, and if you try to kill one to eat, that's your ass.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, that happened in multitude of places. So
yeah. So I mean, I guess it's hard to sing the blues. John Lennon was asked from a soft pillow. It's hard to sing the blues when you have a fridge, and you have like running water and stuff. But that's not true, because we all know that continues on. It could be relationship wise. It could be family ties. It could be a whole number of things.
Sure. But and a lot of it of our own makings. But you're right. It's hard to sing the blues with a full stomach.
Well, John Lennon said that, sort of I'm paraphrasing him, but a reporter asked him, and they said, now that you're millionaires, and they were trying to keep it a secret, and John Lennon was like, what? Huh? Million? Who? Us? Like, and it's filmed. There's an actual film footage of this. He says, yeah, now that you're actually millionaires, is it going to be hard for you to write songs? And Paul, the band is sitting there, and John Lennon was always very quick, to reply. He says, "Oh no, it'll be much more comfortable to write songs from a nice cushy pillow."
That's right. Well, and we project that on people. I mean, I get what the reporter was going after, and I get his response, which was kind of a, up yours, Charlie.
Yeah.
But, on the reporter's side of this, we try to project things onto people.
Yeah.
And he's trying to project a dual purpose, or a purpose, there's a reason John Lennon writes this music.
It's the struggle.
It's his job. That's why he writes that music. It's his job. He wouldn't be a member of the biggest band ever if he didn't write that music. That's why he writes that music. It's his job. Now, that's not to say that there's no emotion behind it. That's not to say that there's no story to tell. That's not saying it didn't come from somewhere inside. That's just saying he wouldn't be John Lennon if he didn't do that. So is it going to be more difficult now that he's got money? No, he'll just be doing it from a cushier place. That's all.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, come on. Yeah.
The Beatles. Obviously, my timeline is far removed from the Beatles by a couple of decades, or separated by a decade. The Beatles were done with 4 to 5 years after, 4 to 5 years before I was born, in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
But you hear these things on the radio coming up and stuff. But the first time I bought a cassette of the Beatles, I decided to go with a compilation, because back then, you know how it was. You buy an album you knew if you purchased compilations that you had like the best of, so you got bang for your buck.
Right.
Well, I went and bought a Beatles compilation. It was the Beatles love songs.
Okay.
And it had like a brown cover, the cassette did, and it had like a gold, I think it was gold, thinking back, sort of oval shape with the 4 Beatles, and it said love on it, Beatles love songs. And I popped that into the cassette in the car driving away. That was the first time I bought an actual for myself of the Beatles. And I had records, like I had the red and the blue and stuff, but but they weren't purchased; they were acquired. Yeah, and so they were loaned, and it just never asked for back in time and
Yeah,
time
never
and
went
when
back. Yeah.
it never went back. But the Beatles love songs, that album, I was amazed that every other love song was just awesome. Yesterday, everything, everything. Just a force to be reckoned with as far as writing. Just amazing stuff.
I was born in 61, so the Beatles weren't quite a thing yet in the US. They were just because, as a matter of fact, they went to, oh my God, what was the club?
The Cavern Club?
The Cavern Club. They did their first session the day after I was born.
Oh, wow.
We were talking about that in a previous episode. Okay. We always go back to the Beatles. That's okay. I like them. So they weren't a thing yet. I was very, very young when they became a thing here in the US. And all the stories you've ever heard about Beatlemania were 100% true. You know, and this is going by what I remember hearing on the radio at the time, and what looking back and hearing Mom talk about it. I mean, you know, she was married to my dad, obviously, but she thought Paul McCartney was just the cutest thing in the world. And it really, really was that way. But growing up during that era, while they were performing, I mean, they stopped touring in what, 66, I want to say?
Yeah, they stopped touring during the Revolver album, or I think it was, they stopped by the time the Revolver album came out.
Okay.
It could be earlier, but I think it's by the Revolver era, which was 66 or 67.
66 or 67. So I was 5 or 6 years old when they stopped touring.
Yeah.
And so I remember hearing their music. I mean, I remember the first time I heard "Come Together," I was in the back seat of the car riding with my dad. My mom and dad, you know, up in the front, and I'm in the back seat. And I thought that intro was just the weirdest thing I'd ever heard, but I dug it. I liked it. And, you know, it was playing on the radio, and okay, fine, great. It wasn't until I was about, 11 or 12, so we're looking at 71, 72, that I really kind of rediscovered their music, and I started buying their albums. The first one I got was Abbey Road, and then I went back and got Sgt. Pepper, and just started picking them up here and there. Hey Jude, and then went back and got Revolver, and then Rubber Soul, and started just every time I saw a Beatles album, I would look at it and, okay, I recognize that song, grab it. But I do remember the compilation albums that you're talking about, and I never bought those. I wanted the original albums.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to, again, that whole album era thing, I wanted to experience the album, you know. Yeah. And still to this day, I think side 2 of Abbey Road is one of the best engineered albums out there. Just the way the music flows together. But I forgot, I had a point to this, and I just totally lost it.
That's all right.
But I think we were tying this into kind of pushing the envelope. No, we weren't either.
No, we were talking about the first time. We were talking about initially cassette tapes, and I asked you the question about, you know, memories of cassette tapes.
Okay.
And we went down the line, and I explained the Beatles cassette tape that I had purchased, and then
that's right. Okay. Well, back at that time, I was still in my 8-track days, so I hadn't made that jump to cassette yet, because I had 3 8-track players in the house and no cassette player. So I had an 8-track recorder. I would do the same thing. I would record various songs off of certain albums onto a tape. And when I bought a new album, if I had space left on this tape, I'd add it on. If I didn't have space left on that tape, I'd start another one. So I had a whole bunch of Beatles compilation 8-tracks that I have no idea where they are now. They're long gone. But when I made the move to cassette, I had kind of backed away from listening to almost exclusively the Beatles, I was in my progressive rock stage, and I was on to, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Pink Floyd and all the rest. But yeah, I never saw them, obviously, because they stopped touring before I was really super interested in music. But the albums were still fresh enough, that they were easily obtainable, and they weren't expensive. And now trying to find them is just about impossible.
Yeah.
But
did you ever see that link that I sent you maybe sometime earlier this week or last week? Time just blends in anymore, but where I said, have you seen John Lennon performing that one song, Your Blues, I think it was, with Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, and Mitch Mitchell from The Experience? I linked you that. Did you ever even click on the link?
I don't remember you linking that to me. I remember you talking about it, but I don't think you sent it to me.
I put it on the inside chat that evening, but we were all talking different things, and you know how that goes.
I do.
But it's unfortunate you didn't see it. Well, you can see. That's the beauty of not being a king in the 1500s, because you can easily click on it now.
I can go look for it. Yeah, exactly.
In fact, our audience, we can all simultaneously plan a simultaneous viewing party in today's timeline, because we have that ability. So they did the Rock and Roll Circus or something like that. I forget the full name of it, but it was like a Rolling Stones sort of like video concert inside like a big top circus, and they had different acts, and John Lennon was one of them, and he chose a song that we would otherwise, as far as I know, there might be another example, I don't think there is, of that song where it's a blues song, very Beatles-like, where he says, "Yes, I'm lonely," and the guitar goes wah-na-na-na, and he does the. And Eric Clapton was the lead guitarist in that group. Very, very cool live performance of that song. And even though it's a blues song, it's still drenched with like the subtleties that the Beatles used to do. Like, it was always a little bit off from what you would expect from a normal song.
Right.
Eric Clapton had a lot of tragedy in his life. I don't know. Do you know about his issues? And I'm not talking about later in life, but just beginning of life and early stages.
Not so much his early life. I do know that he was basically raised by his grandmother.
That's that affected him.
Yeah.
Terribly, but he thought his grandmother was his mom.
Okay, I didn't know it had gone that far back. I'm not. When I say I'm a student of somebody, I mean their music. I don't really go back into their lives or all that. And I love Clapton too. I should probably know this. I just never really dug back that far.
Well, the thing about Clapton was that his mom got pregnant at a very early age. I don't know if it was 16 or 15 or something like that. But I guess it was a big no-no back in the Second World War, or just slightly after the Second World War. And she had gotten pregnant, and she had been in a relationship with a Canadian soldier stationed in England at the time. And so she had the baby, but they decided, apparently, because that's what happened, that the grandparents would become his parents, and she would become like his sister.
Okay.
Now, he later found out all that as a young adult, like inching up on his 20s, or maybe like right in his 20s, and it totally threw him for a doozy, and he had a chip on his shoulder. And although Clapton, to me, visually, he's always seemed, it looks like he's always like present and clear and stable, it appears.
Now,
even if you look at the footage, if you look at through the thing without knowing the biography, but if you look at the guy, he seems like, yeah, I'm here, I'm focused on the music, and it's all about but there's a life behind these people, and this guy was very distraught.
oh yeah,
Yeah, and he would, I mean, musically he came up and became the sensation he did because he was focused on that. There was tragedy, or not tragedy, but melancholia because of life situations. How do you deal with that? And then he just focused on his art, and boy, he's done some really cool stuff, man.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's no denying that at all. I do know that in his younger life, up until relatively recently, I mean, there was never a sober breath.
Yeah.
And I guess a lot of that was, running away. But he got clean, he got sober, his music improved, he found a direction. Because if you listen to his earlier stuff, I mean, we're talking about all of the many bands he was with, but from his earliest days, even playing with the Beatles and all the way up into about the early 80s, he didn't really have a musical direction. He went through blues, he went through reggae, he went through hard rock, he went through the psychedelic rock stage. He didn't really have a direction. And he finally decided, when he cleaned up and got sober and stayed that way, that he was predominantly deep inside a blues player. And he is stuck with that since. He still plays his old music, but his heart and soul is with the blues, and that's where he's decided he's going to stay.
In the oh, go ahead.
And musically, I think he has gotten better with age. I mean, there you go back and you listen to some of those older albums, and there's a lot of good stuff on there, but there's a lot of stuff on there like, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? This just is, you missed it by that much, man. It just isn't quite up to the standard you would think somebody of that caliber could play.
In the 1960s, another little thing that happened, I think you know this one because it's like one of those rock and roll legendary things, but he fell in love with George Harrison's wife.
Right.
And so, and he tried to proclaim his love for her, and she was with George Harrison.
Right.
And one day he comes up to their mansion, estate, whatever, and he knocks on their front door and he demands that she decide, is it him or me? But he's not even married to her, right? This is like one of those things. And he challenges Harrison for a guitar battle, and whoever wins the guitar battle would win her. Like it's some sort of, and they actually, according to people out there, they actually did a guitar battle for the thing. I don't know if something like that. I don't know if Harrison was amused by it or not. But after a few years, they actually divorced, Harrison and Patty, and Eric Clapton quickly flew in and said, "Hey, baby, come on." And they got married.
Well, that's who the song Layla was for. It was written directly to her.
And Something by the Beatles was written by for her too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's she caused a lot of hearts to pop with love and goodness.
Yep. I guess I do remember one little thing when I was talking about Beatlemania. I remember one direction where I was going when I was talking about how real Beatlemania was and how it is the way it is, how it was the way it's portrayed.
Yeah.
Did you ever see a movie called I Want to Hold Your Hand?
I think that's their first movie in black and white.
Not, it's not by the Beatles.
No, the first one was A Hard Day's Night, no?
Right.
Yeah.
This movie was made in 1978. It was the first film directed by Robert Zemeckis.
Okay.
And Steven Spielberg produced it. He was the executive producer. And basically, he got Universal Studios to bankroll it by saying that if Zemeckis isn't doing a good enough job, I'll take over and I'll direct it. And they said, well, okay, fine. But basically what it is it's the story of three kids. This is the week before the Beatles appear on the Ed Sullivan Show in the 1960s. And it's all about Beatlemania as seen by these three kids, two girls and a boy, and trying to get into their hotel to meet the Beatles. And one girl ends up under the bed in their room, but I won't go any further than that. But it kind of sort of, there is footage from the Ed Sullivan Show there. They do perform and everything else. But it's a good example. It's fictionalized. It's highly fictionalized.
Yeah.
But it is a good, realistic example of what Beatlemania actually was.
I'm going to check that out because that's super interesting because it's an alternate to the timeline from the fans' perspective. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's called I Want to Hold Your Hand, and it was done in 1979. Or excuse me, 78. And it was a good flick, but it's a good illustration of what actually happened and what it looked like,
Well, so. I'm gonna try and blow your mind.
Okay.
If possible.
Okay. I'm all ready.
And here we go.
I'm set.
The reason this blows my mind is well, I'll make it apparent, but I'll hit you with it and see what you think. There is going to be a brand new Beatles movie. Beatles themed movie, like what you're talking about.
Okay.
Are you ready for this? Don't look it up or anything because I want to see
my hands are at the end of my arms.
Okay. It's present day world that we live in. But there's a guy that's a musician that he's struggling. Of Middle Eastern stock, and he's like he lives in England and he's like trying to do it and he just, nobody wants to listen to him because there's oversaturation.
Sure.
Get this. The guy either falls asleep, something happens to him, hits something, and he wakes up unbeknownst to him in an alternate universe. Everything's the same except one thing. Nobody has ever heard of the Beatles. There's no Beatles in this world. And one day he's sitting at a park, and he plays Yesterday. And the people sitting there never heard the Beatles never existed. They're like, did you just write that? And he's looking up and he says, no, this is Yesterday by the Beatles. And they said, who? And he says,
the Beatles.
The Beatles. This is and they said, you're so good. Wow, this and that. And he can't believe it. He walks away. After some trial and error, he realizes the fact that there's no Beatles in this world. Mm-hmm. So the guy commences little by little adding all the catalog of the Beatles that he knows how to play, recording it. He ends up in the highest throngs of society. He's the most famous thing in the world. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's called Yesterday, and it's coming out in theaters. I don't know exactly when,
but it's coming.
But it's coming, and I am going to see that one because I love the alternate universe. Tell me that's not cool.
If they pull it off, if they do it, please tell me who's in it. Who's in it? Do you know?
I don't know. I saw the commercial. I was, as always, surfing the internets, the YouTubes, and those little commercials at the beginning, those pre-rolls.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and I was going to click skip ad, but as it was playing, I saw the guy, and I hear Yesterday, All my troubles seem so far. And I'm looking and the guy, and I'm like, wait, that's not Paul McCartney or any. And I see boots and stuff, and then they explain the situation. And I was blown away, dude. I was like, dude, I love this because I just, this is every guitarist's dream in a sick way, because to come up with so much brilliance back to back without any effort, incidentally, because the guy already had, he had the tab books, so he knew the songs. Yeah, so that's what's going on.
It sounds interesting. I gotta say, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I just hope they execute it. I really do. You've got me intrigued. It does sound interesting, and I will admit I just looked it up. Okay. I've heard of one or two people in it, but not in a good way, not in a bad way. Just kind of, I recognize names.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. I just hope they're able to pull it off. I really do, because there's nothing worse to me than a brilliant idea executed poorly.
Oh yeah, but there's a lot of that.
I know, and that's what I mean. I mean, I'm gonna harken back, call back. I'm gonna call back to our very first episode where you were talking about that movie Idiocracy.
Oh yeah,
the premise was excellent. That sounds like it should be a fun movie. They just didn't pull it off. Well, and I've got high hopes for this one.
Well,
I really hope they pull it off.
Everything is okay. So like everything is dependent on one's age, because there's certain things you can't get away with at a certain age, right? Like we can't. There's certain things that will be difficult. Not true all the way 100%, but age is a factor, and also the age of the movie is also a factor. Like there's some stuff that you go back to now, and I've tried to look at, and I can't, I can't do it. It's so aged, but in a way that I don't want to participate.
Right.
For some reason, like I could watch old, like, we've talked about this, Humphrey Bogart movies. I like those because I like returning to this world. But dude, some stuff from the 80s film wise is hard to watch.
Yeah. It is. A lot of it is very, very cringeworthy, and it's not restricted to any decade or generation either. I mean, there was a lot of cringy stuff in the 60s and 70s, and stuff that people just absolutely raved about. Have you ever heard of the movie Love Story?
I think so, yeah.
A young couple, she develops cancer, and spoiler alert, she dies.
Mm-hmm.
People were just ripped apart by that movie, and it was the most important movie. I don't remember how many Oscars it was nominated for. The theme to it was #1 on the radio for however many weeks. And if you were to go back and watch that today, it is the most cringy load of tripe you have ever watched in your life. It wasn't, to me, my opinion, not my style of music, but it was not something I could have sat down and watched then. Thankfully, my mother didn't want to go see it, because she's of the same opinion I am. The more people rave about it, the more I know I'm going to hate it. So, but I mean, talk about cringeworthy. The references are so dated, they're just basically not applicable anymore. And it was overacted. It was very poor. It was low budget, but it shows.
There's a lot of stuff that, like, I don't think I could sit through a Sesame Street sort of thing, right? Show or like whatever. It's hard. I could watch a little cartoon snippet and stuff and enjoy, but I don't think I could watch an extravagant amount of cartoons like I used to consume when I was a kid. But there's some things that you could pull off to the majority of people, but that you can just smell a mile away. And if you tried to watch that movie, it was too much, right?
Oh, it was just so, it was predictable. It was hackneyed, And we're talking about Ryan O'Neal and Ali McGraw. We're not talking about two unknowns. But just the whole premise of it today would be like, yeah, and
Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but it was the biggest sensation. Oh, God, when did that come out? I got to look it up now.
Incidentally, for our podcast listening audience, we do want to mention that every now and then we come up on YouTube and do live. This show is being filmed and viewed, or is it recorded? Video and audio recorded live.
Yeah, live on YouTube right now.
On YouTube. So you might be interested in checking out our website, or you could go, our website is trampledunderfootpodcast.com, but you could also go through that link and check out our YouTube channel, which is Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube, and every now and then you'll catch us doing these shows. And we have some great ideas coming as well. But did you find that information, Mark?
I did. It came out in 1970. And it was an American romantic drama written by Eric Siegel. And oh my God. Oh man. Anyway, it was a huge thing back in the day, and one I'm glad finally went away. I mean, talk about cringy. It really, really is. And that's one of those movies that you can't go back. They did make
you can't go back and erase from your memory banks?
Well, I never saw it, so luckily I was saved that trauma.
Right.
But they did make a sequel to it a few years later, all about him after she died. But it didn't have as much oomph then, and folks were kind of, yeah, okay, fine. Don't milk it. And it kind of just faded away. But it was one of those movies that just does not hold up.
Yeah.
It didn't hold up at the time, but it was, it was. And I've given it more attention now than I gave it when I was 9 years old. So,
well, did you ever go back and watch? Because you've gotten a little bit of not homework, but a few. So, did you ever go back and watch? And by the way, has Linda seen it? That Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show. Did you ever go back and watch it?
No, I did not. I didn't. I found it. I have it. But I haven't put it on yet. I can't get 2 hours to sit down and watch anything. I really can't.
Okay, so that one is one that I will risk my credibility to tell you that it's a great movie on many levels. I just love, I love that kind of abstract sort of like alternate sort of, trying to break through secrets. It's such a great movie. You have to see it.
Now you are 50-50 because, Idiocracy was, in my opinion, really bad.
No, but I didn't tell you to go see it.
But you recommended the Netflix series Norseman to me.
Right.
And you hit a home run there. Folks listening, if you have not checked out the Netflix series Norseman, do yourself a favor and go do it. Just, stop whatever it is, set aside, and give yourself 3 episodes. The first one's going to make you go, what? The second one's going to make you go, The third one's going to make you go, where's number 4?
Yeah, I was good by number 2. The number 1 was weird. The referencing of modern attitudes set in that sort of era. But I said, you know what? I got to watch because it's just a little kind of intriguing. And by number 2, I was like, that's the ride we're on. Okay.
Number 2, I was like, okay, this is getting interesting. Number 3, I was like, okay, now you got me. You got me. But yeah, number 1 was kind of now, and they have to set the scene. They have to set the story. They throw a lot of information at you all at once. A lot of things happen. A lot of them are explained in the second episode, by the third, you're hooked.
Let me tell you this and see what you think about this. And I kind of think I know what your answer is going to be. I'm hoping, or not that I'm hoping, but I think that your answer is going to be a certain way. It might not be, so it'll be surprising to me. A lot of people, and this is just one of those random thoughts, but a lot of people, to do with what we're saying about Northmen and all that, a lot of people think that people back in the day lacked a lot of critical sort of brain filtering processes, psychology, and that only just now people, like for instance, you just grab a kid and smash the heck out of him and you do what I say, you little punk. There were people in my esteem that did that, as that they still do. As an example, there could be numerous. And by little kid is like disciplining the kid in an outrageously violent way, as an example. It could be anything. It could be just psychology of relationships and whatnot, just anything. That back then, every barbarians, and then there was something that happened. Now we're here, where now we have knowledge and we're clear about things. I tend to think that we as humans throughout history, sort of, there was a little bit of everything. You had people that were kind to animals then. You have people that are kind to animals now. You had people that were pretty nasty with creatures, and just like you have them, just everything that we have now was still back then, and the psychology, the advanced way that one sort of all that always existed. But what do you think?
I think you're right in a number of ways. I think the psychology always existed, but we also had society at the time. I don't know that men really thought women were second-class citizens. The powers that be did. And in order to become part of the powers that be, you had to at least think and speak that way. Whether they actually believed it or not.
That's good. That's good that you said that, because I tend to believe that the society, like you're saying, but at home, not every guy was a cold-hearted brute and stuff. And
right, exactly. When they get behind closed doors and it's you talking with your wife,
yeah,
what kind of home life are you really going to have? Because believe me, she knows where the steak knives are.
Yeah. And not to mention they could be pretty crafty in psychology and every other thing.
And that goes for anybody. It doesn't have to necessarily be a woman. It could be a kid. It could be, somebody who lived out in the, who was a stable hand, who was tired of sleeping with the horses and wanted to try some of this indoor stuff, Yeah. Now, you also had the way societies were structured. The church was a huge thing. And when it said X, Y, and Z, you did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much because you truly believed in the doctrine, but you had to at least give the appearance of believing in the doctrine in order to, just stay alive.
It was the standard.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But as more and more people came to power who didn't believe that, who didn't think that way, or who wanted to change something, we have always had a consciousness to know what we're doing to people, places, things, animals, our surroundings, what have you. Our ability to control that changes society. The first peoples were nomads. They moved from one place where they lived for a while to another place they lived for a while. Usually after they fouled it up so much with trash and sewage that they couldn't stand it anymore, and they moved on to the next place where it didn't stink so bad.
Yeah.
But then as they finally started developing a little bit of a consciousness toward hey, maybe this stuff isn't necessarily good for us, and that stink is trying to warn us about that, they started figuring out ways of getting rid of it. Not always in the best way, but then, they were able to more set down roots and grow crops and weren't relying on the crops they found, So our consciousness kind of develops with our technology and with our knowledge. You know, we've only had antiseptic medical facilities for not very long in human existence. You know, I'll give you 150 years, but I don't think it was that much.
But wait, let me interject. So we're saying that obviously, as culture and society evolves and knowledge is gained in certain areas,
Right.
things are adopted into the mainstream, and it just grows from there. But that there's certain things, you know, as far as the ratio, maybe not the ratio. Let's not even say that, but that we had evil people, kind people, people that could think psychologically. It wasn't my big sort of issue with it is that some people from these generations, they're like, oh, it's now that we're, you know, now it's when we've got it all together as far as, but that humans, it's been a progression, but there's always the kind-hearted, there's always the psychopathic, there's always all these things, and the psycho that's always exist. So you're saying yes to
yeah,
that.
I do agree with that. I think but we touched on this once before. I think what has happened though in the last 20 years especially is that it's now easier to see. These people are easier to hear.
Okay.
And there are more platforms for them to get the words out. We no longer have to go down to the town square, stand up on a soapbox and read off of a document. We can get on YouTube, or we can jump on social media, and we can say anything we want. And you're seeing the louder ones get the attention.
Right.
And the consciousness, I think, was always there. The psychology, I think, was always there. There are people who were rotten to animals. There are people who were always kind to animals.
Yeah.
It's just now we have a greater ability to see the difference and see the louder of the two.
Right.
You know what I mean? And, you know, the movements that you see nowadays have always been there. They just get more attention today because that attention is easier to get.
Okay, let me throw this in. So saying movements, it's almost as if they're repeating things that I don't want to say settled, but they're acting surprised about things that have always been. Certain ways of interacting with people. To come out and say it bluntly, it could be anything from exactly that. How men treat women, women treat men, disproportionate this, all these sort of like scaled measures and stuff. And so, well, these things have been addressed. A lot of people, because they're learning about it now. Oh, we're learning about it. There's a lot of things that have already occurred that it's kind of settled or have been in the public, but these people don't, you know. So it's kind of like we're Groundhog Daying, you know.
Yeah, to a point. I see that a little bit, but some of it is reopening old wounds on things that were that I thought were settled.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I still don't understand. This is 2019. I still don't know why we're having some of the discussions we're having these days.
Right. That's what I'm
like,
thinking.
you know, yeah. I thought a lot of these things were settled years ago. And basically we settled it by saying, you know, don't be a dick. I mean, we can bleep that if you want to.
Yeah.
But, you know, just be civil to one another and treat people like people.
Yeah.
But evidently we haven't, because it has to be said. I'm not saying that these people are making up stories, because when they clearly aren't making it up. I mean, but some of the things that are going on, I'm wondering what made you think that was a good idea to do that? Yeah. You know, you learn this stuff when you're 4. You just don't act that way. You don't talk that way. You don't treat people that way. Does it really need to be said again? You're 35. Come on. You know,
it's kind of like, what we were talking about in the beginning with Van Gogh, and I mentioned at one point in the beginning where life is like, it's as if those lessons that people from way back then, and the sufferings and joys, those experiences which are, I guess, circular, as time goes on, you have the life of a human being. They experience all these things. That life ceases, and then you have these new ones coming up as generations go, and it's the same thing. And these little add-on experiences of technology, the facades being painted differently, but it's like we're kind of like, basically, the reason I like history is because you kind of sort of look back and you say, oh, wow, we came from someplace. And wow, these people had these strifes and thoughts and stuff. So, it's not like I'm inventing this all on my own. Here I am. And there's actually a history of, and a lot of these people nowadays, they didn't look back and they think that they're on the cuffs of some great humanity awakening. But no, they're not.
No.
And a lot of these things have been settled, so.
Well, they have, yes. But also it's a failure on our part, because one of the most valuable aspects of history, like you were talking about, is it's there for you to learn from. But if you don't learn from it, if you don't discuss it, if you're not taught it, you're doomed to make those mistakes over and over again. Yeah. You probably know that it's wrong, but until you can put it into a context of seeing what happened and what led up to things changing, you don't know how it's wrong. You don't know why it's wrong. You don't know what people went through to get as far as they are. Look at the woman's right to vote. That came to a head and was finally settled in the 20s. It took from 1789, when the Constitution was ratified, to the 1920s. That fries my brain. How did it take that long? The sentiment was always there. The feeling was always there. The people didn't get the attention. I think what we're seeing now is it's easier to get the attention. It's easier to have a voice. It's easier to get that voice heard. So we're hearing more and more and more and more voices. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong in that.
So I saw a documentary where they were talking about women's right to vote and freedom and all this. And I was watching this documentary, and it was an incredible thing. It wasn't. I don't think that the documentary was directly about that, but about the guy that was hired to help in the marketing of that movement and market it and promote it and sort of give it an angle where it can enter, the social consciousness. And I forget the name. These are all paraphrased stories, but it's kind of sort of right where it's. And the guy, so smoking was something that women couldn't do out and about, or it was frowned upon. And in fact, in many cases, there were laws prohibiting in public and whatnot. There was a lot of stuff across and this guy did the cigarette thing ads and saying, I think it was like freedom candles or freedom torches.
Torches of freedom.
Torches of freedom. And to me, it just blew up everywhere. So everybody, the blending of those two things, it was unbelievable just to hear these. So as an example that you brought up with the voting, all these things, there's history behind that. Right. A lot of people nowadays, for whatever reason, it's not like everybody can know everything, but there's like these movements that spring up that there's actual precedents in the past leading, that, okay, did you not look back and see that there's situations that have evolved? And
no, and that's why I say it's a failure on our part, because it's not being taught.
We can't teach everybody everything, and not everybody pays attention.
No, you can't, but you can teach kids to be civilized. I mean, I was taught 4 rules of life in a civilized society. And I was taught this at a very young age. Keep your hands to yourself. Leave other people's things alone. Be nice to people and mind your own business. If we taught those 4 things, I seriously, honestly think about 2/3 of the world's problems would not exist. Keep your hands to yourself. Leave other people's things alone. Be nice to people and mind your own business.
So let me I ran across another unbelievable thing. And so I ran across a channel that all they do is take footage, rescue footage from the past,
mm-hmm.
and they archive it on their channel and on a website as well. We've seen these before, and we've talked about this, in reference here and there, but I ran across the video of 1928, 1929, Cuba.
Wow.
And it caught my eye, and I said, well, I'm going to invest, and I pressed play. And it was the Pan-American, all the footage, they actually went to the streets, and they had an early form, and they had actual audio with the video. In such meticulously pristine visuals that it'll give you a chill up your spine. And the audio, too. The audio is kind of, but it's still pretty clear. There was a Pan-American sort of, and America was there, and so they go into a tobacco rolling factory, and you could see the women there rolling the tobacco, the guys on one side, and they have this big platform with a guy sitting up top reading the newspaper to the tobacco rolling people. And you could hear, like, they panned away, and then they'd have someone on the ground and stuff. This is 1928, 1929. They actually have conversations with the ladies, and you hear them talking vividly. Dude, it's unbelievable. They go outside, and they show the streets, and the guys were wearing those brimmed hats that were white with the stripe around them.
Oh, the straw Panama hats, yeah.
And my grandfather, which was, I did the calculation last night, he was 18 or 19 during the time that was filmed, because he was born in 1911. He moved to Cuba from Spain in sometime in the early whatever, maybe early 1920, sometime like that, or maybe just had gotten there. I don't know the exact date but I see him in a photograph in Cuba with that hat on in the streets of Cuba. My granddad. And it just, to see the footage, know that picture, I have to go look for that picture, and know that picture, it's such a mind-blowing thing, dude.
Yeah.
It's almost 100, it's like 90 years ago.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That must have been something. I'd like to check out that video. That does sound interesting. I like old stuff like that. I like exploring old stuff like that. Still to this day, when I find photos of, I'm about 7 miles away from where the hospital I was born in used to stand.
Wow.
So, I know this area. I've kind of been around it. But I run across photos of this town from the early 1900s, and well, even up into the 60s. And I see what has changed, what hasn't changed. I dig that old kind of thing. I really love exploring old photographs like that, especially when there's an emotional connection.
I'm with you, dude. Yeah, that's what dude. That's what we do here. That's part of what we do, right?
Yeah. I mean, that kind of thing has always fascinating me, seeing old stores and seeing old restaurants and old, just areas that have been bulldozed. I mean, the bus station, which is no longer there. There's an office building now. They bulldozed the entire thing, and there's an office building there. But seeing all those old things that I remember walking around, or seeing things before I was born, just to kind of make a little bit of a connection there. To me, that's just absolute fun.
I agree with you. I wanted to say, because I just remembered this bit. It was 1928, 1929. Actually, it crossed into both years for some reason. I don't know why, but they actually document it with what each film reel, when it was all dated. But during that time, I think Prohibition was occurring in America. And only 90 miles away, you can ferry boat over, and people were getting loaded, dude. You could see it in the videos, the bars, the alcohol. even so today, one thing you don't see is bartenders with a cigarette or cigar in their mouth. Back then, the guy had a cigar and he'd drink. You'll see this though, but he'll drink with the customer and
Yeah.
stuff. It was such a
You,
trip, dude.
you still occasionally see him drinking with the customer, depending upon the bar. Little small hometown bars. Oh God, yeah. I worked on slot machines. I've been in bars where the bartender was just as potted as the customers. So that was a very normal thing, as a matter of fact. But yeah, well, yeah, that's again society saying, "Oh no, smoking is bad," and this, that, and the other. You know, we always seem to be trying to mold society into what we think the ideal society should be, and we keep missing it by just that much. You know.
Oh yeah.
But I think a lot of it has to do with, as we say, failing to look at history and seeing that there's a consequence for our behavior, and then being surprised when there is a consequence, because we're not taught about consequences from a young enough age. You know, I don't know. That's just my opinion. I'm old. What do I know?
I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you, guys. I think we're good.
Yep, I think we're great.
All
We've
right.
had a few people over in the chat. I'll acknowledge, Steve, Jim Dockrell, Katie Dotson, Jamie Page was there. Can't sleep. We've had quite a few over there. Thanks for joining us, guys. We don't always do this. We just decide, yeah, let's go ahead and go live.
This will become an audio podcast on Spreaker, and you can find it on Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com. It comes out every Tuesday, and we have a backlog in our Wayback Machine of a bunch of different episodes with really awesome. I recommend one episode. There's a few I recommend, but I'll recommend Atom Smasher. You should check out that episode as well.
Episode 11. Do you have that memorized yet?
Not that it's 11. I picture. I've actually ingrained the image of the photo that we did, your story, and the episode. It might change in the future. I mean, how you can only eat, I guess, Hubba Bubba bubble gum for so many years, but for now, it's my favorite.
Oh man. Well, thanks for joining us, folks. We're going to call this an end. I think we're going to leave this one up. I don't know. We might, but an edited version of this will be on the podcast somewhere down the road. So thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging with us.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.